today Roberto Newell's paper on the perceptions and the reality in the economic performance of Mexico. Each of you have got a copy of that, and I know that he'll be presenting his leading findings, many of which are disturbing, but not that you need to exclude 16-year-olds. Answering this is Carlos Hurtado, a well-renowned economist from ITAM in Mexico, the Deputy Minister at Hacienda for Budget, and now the General Manager of the IDB. So we have two of the finest speakers here. I should also mention that Roberto is the founder of the Mexican Institute of Competitivity, and before that he served in the Fox administration reorganizing the sugar industry. Anybody who takes on that task must have gut.
Or no brains.
He has lots of that. He has lots of. Roberto, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. I'm going to do it this way because it's a long room, and you won't be able to see me if I sit through it. Let me start off with the usual pleasantries. The first is, Andrew, thank you ever so much for having been my host and leader and pastor for these last 3 months. I've had the privilege of being a fellow in public policy at the Mexico Institute of the Center, and I've had a ball. Everybody should have a transition such as I'm having here in Washington. Because, as you probably just heard, I am no longer the head of IMCO. I am in that point of my life where I'm unemployed and maybe I'll never get another real job. See. I also want to thank Diana and Carlos for having accepted to participate in this. Everything that happens hereafter will be my responsibility. And I want to acknowledge two people who put in sweat equity and who would be officially part of this paper if one were really honest, but I'm not really that honest. One is Janet Spikes, who is our librarian here at Woodrow Wilson. She's amazing, and she really helped put my rusty skills back to world-class level, helping me to overcome many of the barriers of documentation that were important in order to be able to do some of the work that we did here. The other is Diogo Simas. Diogo has been my intern. He's got all the other skills that I wish I had, plus youth, which is a wonderful combination to have. I don't have skills or youth anymore. Let me tell you what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to walk through most of the key, well, maybe I'm not going to do anything. Most of the key findings. Pues no. Diogo, if you...
You see your little mouse?
The mouse?
Try the mouse.
Este?
No, yeah.
Oh, maybe it's that one.
Try that one.
So we have many frozen mice. A ver aquí. See?
There we go. Let's see. You can start talking.
All right. What I'm going to do is try and address the issue of what do we do in order to restore Mexico's reputation. The thesis of this presentation is that we have a big perceptions problem and a significant issue between reality and perceptions, and that if we don't do something and step up to the challenge of changing those perceptions will start to shape reality. Having that happen would be a significant tragedy to Mexico. I will try and then document that first there is a perceptions problem, that this is a really critical issue. The second is that there are real things that are behind this perceptions issue that we have to acknowledge and work on, and that this is the real agenda for Mexico. But that if you look at the evidence objectively, Mexico is not in as bad a shape as conventional wisdom seems to suggest. And thereafter, I'll try to clarify just how big the challenge that lies ahead of us is, how valuable it is, and obviously lay out the principles of an agenda for action. So here we go. Let me start off with what I found to be the most shocking piece of data that I was able to dredge up. There's an organization called the East-West Communications Group. The East-West Communications Group has an internet-based tool that looks at all of the newspapers that are published worldwide, actually not all of them, but a very large array of them, several hundreds, and then constructs on the basis of the word, say, Mexico, but it could be the United States or China or what have you, an index which allows them to interpret how countries are perceived. And this is on the way to creating a brand value index. This index does nothing more than associate the word Mexico with the words that precede it and the words that follow it to see in what way Mexico is being discussed, whether what's being discussed is essentially positive and points to the future, or whether it is relatively negative. Mexico is one of the 200 countries that are graded by this branding service using this objective tool. And what's cool about the tool is that objective, and of course what's the weakness of this tool is that there's no interpretation put into these. This is just a blind machine. But this blind machine puts Mexico in 196 out of 200 of the countries that are evaluated. It's not that we're not getting attention, because there are actually about 113,000 citations in newspapers, which is a goodly amount of citations. It's that the words that are associated with Mexico tend to connote concepts of violence, corruption, crime, and so on, all of which, of course, have negative associations attached to them. And so if we were talking about Mexico as a commercial product, its brand equity, we would immediately have evidence here that Mexico's got a brand image problem of very significant import. This wasn't always the case. If you look back just a few years ago, we were actually considered to be amongst the best in the world and to be doing everything that was right. In fact, The Economist, in a publication that was published in the end of December 1991, spoke of Mexico's members of its cabinet as the most economically literate group that had ever been put together anywhere in the world at any time in history. Now, this is obviously some overstatement, but it is a pretty strong, bold assessment of what we had going in Mexico in the early 90s. Of course, this was a time when we were reshaping the Mexican economy, following many of the basic dictates of the famous Cambridge Consensus or Washington Consensus, whichever you want to call it. It was also a time when we were reshaping Mexico to involve it in the global economy in ways that were pretty forward-looking and that changed the perspective that the world had of Mexico in a very short period of time. In fact, it's not only that they were considered economically literate, they were also considered to be very competent at selling Mexico, able to project a view of Mexico that was convincing everybody that was out there listening that we were going places. And this was just a short time ago, certainly in my professional life, and everybody who was involved in this reshaping of Mexico is still alive, because they were very young men at the time, and some of the most significant shapers of that change, say Jaime Serrapuche, or Luis de la Calle, or Pedro Aspe, are still very much in the middle of battle and doing very valuable things for Mexico and for the firms and institutions that they're involved in. And boy, have things changed ever since. Some of the work that we did allowed us to shape a very simple time series that follows what subjects have been on the pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. We constructed a time series that just simply asked the question, what categories of reporting did Mexico fall into in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times? These are the numbers for the New York Times. What you see here is just simply a series distribution, a time series that follows how many articles were being written at our prime. We were the subject of about 270 articles. This was in 93, 94. On the run-up to NAFTA, when Mexico was a discussion item of significance, not only because of Mexico, but because of the implications that this would have for the United States and all of the North American area. Not all of the articles that were being written at the time were positive. Some of them, frankly, reflected the concerns of labor, environmentalists, and interest groups in the United States that said, geez, this is not in our best interest. But what was important is that the takeaway of these articles was Mexico is being reshaped by this. Mexico will be modernized by Mexico. This is a big step forward by Mexico. So the contents, when you look at them objectively, dispassionately, and particularly if you step away from them, were very forward-looking and very optimistic about Mexico's future, even if these came at a cost to the United States, as some of these people argued. After that, if you watch the trend, and I'm illustrating this all with one graph, and I'll go through 3 others very rapidly, you'll see that the interest in Mexico waned. We were really a hot subject in 93, 94. Now we are relatively less important in terms of frequency of articles being written. And if you look and perhaps try and discern what is it that they're talking about, it turns out that we really changed in terms of subject matter. The overwhelming majority of the articles that were written in the early 90s were about Mexico and politics, Mexican economy and Mexican politics. They were articles that were, let me call them, serious articles about serious issues. And we went from serious articles about serious issues to articles that deal basically with headlines to do with beheadings, organized crime, corruption, and of course that ever popular subject to do with undocumented aliens in the United States. And if you see how the time series has taken shape, we went from being a country about which there was a serious discussion going on, almost nothing to do with corruption, to a country where this is the overwhelming discussion. And consequently, the New York Times is mirroring exactly the same phenomenon in the way it reports Mexico that brand equity evaluation that I showed you before. It's all about what's going on that's negative, that's bad. And what this, of course, does is debilitate the country's reputation and affect many of the issues that have to do with Mexico's future and Mexico's economy. Much the same happened in the case of the Wall Street Journal. Again, if you look for the peak, you find it in 93, 94. After that, interest waned. But what's interesting is that this is a highly specialized entity. You'd expect it to continue to have its focus be on economics. That's its métier. And in these last few years, of course, they went for those sad issues to do with corruption and crime and border issues. This perhaps reflects reality. It probably also reflects Rupert Murdoch taking over. He did about almost 4 years ago now. So there might be an editorial shift in interest as well. But the fact of it is, one way or the other, Mexico went from being a business story to being a story about crime. If we were talking about a local newspaper, we went from the business pages and the editorial pages to the Metro section with blood-curdling figures and images to do with crime in Mexico. I don't think that this started in Mexico. I think that, in fact, the story about Mexico as a crime-ridden society started in Mexico, and it actually is reflected in the Mexican press every day. If you look at Reforma, where I am a columnist, so I have to have my heart in its favor. See, 57% of the articles written between April 12 and May 11 had as their headline, 57% of the issues had as their headline a crime-related story. And this is just crime. I didn't even throw in stories that suggested corruption in Congress, for instance, and there were 2 or 3 of those, because I didn't want to tilt it even more. So when you have almost 60% of the stories related to crime, what you do is you create a perception which is communicated to everybody else out there. I do not believe there's a conspiracy afoot to make Mexico's image look bad. I think there's simply stuff going on that has engendered a very, very powerful negative perception. And so if you try to summarize, there's a wonderful cartoon by Gary Larson that shows Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is a Tyrannosaurus Rex wearing a hat and a sarape, done by Gary Larson. This is what we became in the course of these last few years. We are now Tyrannosaurus Rex. By the way, I was called Tyrannosaurus Rex during the years that I worked at McKinsey because the teams that worked for me were all subjected to a lot of late-night crunches and heavy exercises in work. And so I was Tyrannosaurus Rex. I've carried this aura with me, and this cartoon speaks of how I view the world as well. And in fact, I think it's honest if we agree that all is not well with Mexico. There are reasons for all of this smoke. I think the key problem in the Mexican economy, if I had to point to just one thing that's got to be fixed and fixed soon, is to change the shape of these curves. This is 3 ways of measuring how Mexicans' incomes are doing over time. I think the best measure of all is this one, which is productivity per worker employed in the Mexican economy. And if you looked at what's happened to that number, from the 80s to date, it fell during the famous lost decade and has been basically steady and flat ever since then. This is why the Mexican economy is not growing. This is why we have a perception that Mexico is not playing with the big boys, why it's not one of the BRICS, because we've not been able to solve the conundrum of how do you make worker productivity grow on a sustained basis. Notice that if you measure these things with different indices, you come to different conclusions. If you measured it with per capita income, that is dividing a population, you'd have come to the conclusion that Mexico's economy was growing somewhat. And this is a good welfare metric, so I don't want to poo-pah it. But it does suggest that the reason the Mexican economy has grown is not because productivity has grown, but because we're employing more people. And that, in fact, is exactly what's happening in the Mexican society. Now, why is productivity flat? Well, productivity is flat because we haven't been able to shape a consensus about major changes, that second wave of reforms that is often spoken of, that will allow us to move forward at a better rate. In fact, this didn't start with the PRI. The PRI is currently blamed all the time for being el partido del no, the party that says no to everything. But if you looked at the politics of earlier decisions, the electricity sector reform, the FOBAPROA emergency, which required putting together legislation that enabled the government to take over banks and to turn them around, there wasn't consensus then either. The consensus was being denied to the party in government, in this case PRI, by the 2 parties in opposition. And the same thing happened when the parties shaped. And guess what? This is really not a big surprise. This is what you expect to see happen when you are in a multi-party democracy with a lot of veto holders in society. And in fact, that's exactly the game that's happening today with all of the more recent reforms that we've tried to enable in order to make Mexico grow more rapidly. We have a paradox, the wonderful paradox of more intrinsic stability because we're now a democracy, but it's the stability of the graveyard. We're going very, very slowly on major areas of reform and consequently are unable to unleash the Mexican tiger. Other things were pointing in the right direction and then have turned around. For instance, if you look at Mexico's time series, this is crimes or intentional homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in Mexico. You look at this, we were on the right trend. In fact, if you go further back in this, as Escalante has, you find that the moment where we had most intentional homicides was in the early 90s, right after the period where the Article 27 of the Constitution was rewritten in order to allow the privatization of some of the agricultural land. A mini agrarian reform was carried out at the time. And this unleashed a great deal of violence in Mexico. So if you look at that time series, they would have been doing this. And then comes President Calderón's declaration of war on the cartels, and this takes off. And that reshaping, of course, happens as part of an intentional pursuit of criminal activity in Mexico. Some would think that this is good. Some certainly think that it is bad. But it's being used now in a way that is highly politicized. Now, in fact, Mexico cannot be really well understood if you regard it with one flat curve of the sort I just used. This is a histogram which shows how crime is distributed by states in the Mexican Federation. And you see, this is the national average most recently. That number would be that last number on that time series that I showed you before. It's 18 Mexicans per every 100,000 Mexicans are being killed. The vast majority of states, the most frequent, the modal distribution, shows lower crime rates, a lot lower crime rates than the average. In fact, with states like Yucatan down there in the Swiss average, which is pretty cool. What's driving the averages are the outliers. The outliers are Chihuahua, particularly Ciudad Juárez, the city, the Sinaloa, Tamaulipas, and to a lesser degree, states like Michoacan, which are in this region. I live in Cuernavaca. Cuernavaca is in the state of Morelos. Morelos is right smack on the national average. It's the only state, by the way, that's smack on the national average. Either you're better or you're worse. And in fact, regionally, we're generally better. So Mexico is not even captured well using average figures for this, which is what we are tarred by a lot. In fact, if you ask the question, how do we compare against, say, the BRICS? We're not even that different from some of the BRICS. Mexico, say, against Brazil, comes out with a favorable comparison. Brazil has actually got more intentional homicides per 100,000 inhabitants than does Mexico. Brazil, however, had the courage, and in this case the political leadership, to say we're going for the World Cup in Rio de Janeiro in 2 years. This is the city that has a criminal problem similar to that of Ciudad Juárez. If President Calderón had said, let's go for a World Cup and make Ciudad Juárez the site for the championship, it would have been really quite amazing. But we're not even close to the worst in Latin America. If you look at the numbers for other Latin American countries, in fact, countries that typically are used by organized crime in order to traffic drugs to the United States, you find that that problem which Mexico has, which is a serious problem, is much more serious in several other societies. So why is Mexico being tarred with this awful image more so than others? Well, I have a very simple reason, because we haven't responded, because we just simply took our eye off the ball. Because in fact, perceptions and reality are significantly misaligned. Let me tell you what's good and what's bad about Mexico in relationship to the BRICS. And I'm going to put focus on the BRICS just simply because these are the heroes of today, and Mexico is, of course, the dog. Mexico, the dog, is growing slowly in comparison to the BRICS. And without a doubt, I would wish that we were growing more rapidly. We would be growing more rapidly if we were solving that productivity issue that I spoke of earlier. I'd like this curve to be up here, in which case we would have instantaneously been a place that everybody would have regarded as a great place to be. This is probably our key weakness. But if you ask the question, even with current performance, what's the outlook for the others? It'll take some time. This is IMF numbers. They're not mine. All I did was just project them into the future, okay? It'll take China until 2027 to pass us in terms of per capita income. It won't happen in the case of India until the end of the century. So we are already on just a different plane of performance, very similar to Brazil. In fact, we're in sort of a technical tie with Brazil, somewhat behind Russia, but Russia very much dependent on the price of oil and its ability to continue to exploit that sector. And these other two societies growing extremely well. I envy the growth rates of Russia and India, but coming from such a low level by comparison to Mexico, that we really are missing the point when we say, geez, wouldn't we wish that Mexico were another BRIC? The only thing I really wish we were was a faster growing Mexico. Reasons why this is the case. If you look at the average household in Mexico and how much it spends almost twice as much as the next, and a whole hell of a lot more than the next. This is a very good way of approaching a measurement of two things: household well-being and perhaps more important than household well-being, if you're looking at this metric for selfish purposes, how much do these households offer you in terms of purchasing power if you're building a business that sells goodies to these guys? I would rather be Walmart selling to a Mexican household than Walmart selling to a Chinese or an Indian household, because the purchasing power of those households just simply are very different. It's also an easier country in which to do business. If you looked at the doing business metrics that put together by the World Bank, which are pretty cool, I think these are reasonably done numbers. Our performance is not excellent. Excellent would be, top 10. But our performance is better on 5 of the 10 things that the World Bank measures than the performance of the other, of the famous BRICS. So Mexico, on average, is a better place to do business than are the BRICS.
Roberto, just identify for us, 0 is the optimum, 100
Yeah,
is...
1 would be the best, and the higher the number, the worse. These are rankings. So we have 183 countries measured in this, and Mexico has ranks that follow from, I think the best is this one, 24, to 90 some, 106 something. And these numbers are comparable across categories. It's an interesting way of measuring things. It's an objective set of tests that are put together by the World Bank. And then you go at the business of asking and answering the same question over and over in these different countries. So you have a nice objective way of evaluating how easy is it to do business in a country. I think this is one of the better metrics that is out there. If you look at another measure of the future of societies, Mexico's population is relatively young. As a consequence, we are a society that will continue to offer growth opportunities both for the Mexicans and which will be able to delay the pension bomb and the health bomb that other countries are already facing. Mexico will grow almost 50% more between now and the middle of the century. India, even more. But you have countries like China or Russia that are already facing a very significant demographic decline. And in both cases, they're doing so without a social security system or a health network to provide the cushion that's required in order to keep this from turning into an explosive issue. In fact, in a society like Russia, you have numbers that suggest a demographic crisis is underway of the sort that is rarely seen anywhere in the world. Additional indicators is Mexico has better life expectancy and, oh, by the way, better healthy average life expectancy than do other countries in the same category that we're constantly compared against, invidiously, by the way, without doing it. Mexico also does better in schooling vis-a-vis 3 of the 4 BRICS. Russia has got a huge endowment of human capital. I am envious of what they are able to do. They have their average the person in the labor force has 13 years of schooling. But Mexico is in better shape than Brazil or China or India. I think Chinese quality is probably better than is Mexico. But certainly we compare favorably, say, with Brazil, both in terms of quality and quantity. So these are not numbers to get all excited about, just simply...
Just again, help us. These are enrollment figures or these pieces?
No, these are schooling levels of people in the labor force. So Mexicans who are in the labor force already, on average, have close to 8 years of education. Okay? And these are people, already employed.
Can you comment, though, Roberto, on that's a quality measure, the numbers of Chinese in the workforce with education compared to the numbers of Mexicans?
See, a very simple way of looking at this is to recognize that Mexico is 1/13 of the population of China. If you look at the relative availability of, say, qualified engineers in China, they are going to have many more, perhaps 6 times more engineers than we do in a population that's 13 times larger than ours is. So their absolute offer of qualified people is huge. And this is useful if you're trying to build, for instance, a manufacturing sector offer, Or in the case of India, they're turning out zillions of engineers all of the time. This is very useful if your name is IBM and you want somebody who will be a cheap programmer. Large masses of people, even if on average they're poorly prepared, are still very useful if you're building that type of a business. Okay?
But by the same token, 8 years of education is not sufficient to deal with the productivity questions that are confronting.
I think that's an important issue. And I certainly, don't want to pretend that Mexico's broken the back of the productivity issue through education. We're far from it. We probably need to get to about 15 years in educational attainment before productivity driven by the head takes off. So on average, people who are employed would have to improve 7 more years. People going into schools right now are likely to end up with 12 years of education, which is still short of the 15 that we would want to get to if we were going to play head games instead of brute force games in the global economy. But if I had to make an assessment of where we are today, Mexico today is the best it's ever been. So the objective evidence is we're in pretty good shape vis-a-vis the BRICS, and we're certainly in pretty good shape vis-a-vis our history. I wouldn't want to go back in history and pick a date and say we were a better Mexico then. We are a better Mexico today. Our factor endowment is healthier. We have more of just about everything that's good, and less of a couple of things that I wish: higher growth rates and higher education levels. And in this environment, businesses do well. Very simple numbers here. I took operating profits for the Mexican subs of a group of companies that are quoted in the SEC and that have to meet the 10K requirements and consequently break down a great deal of information about their subs and what they contribute to the total operating profits of the corporations, and divided that operating profit number by total assets. This takes away all of the funny stuff to do with taxes. It takes away the stuff to do with debt. It looks at real numbers over real numbers. And what BBVA, for instance, Bancomer's operating unit in Mexico, does for BBVA profits is amazing. It's 37% of total profits come from Mexico. If you look at Walmex, Walmex is the Mexican sub of Walmart. It contributes more than 10% of total profits. On average, if Mexico broke down and performed exactly as it should on average, the number should look like 2%, because Mexico is 2% of the global economy. So anytime that you go over, say, 4 or 5%, you're already talking about performance above and beyond what you would expect. And we're looking here at numbers that suggest that Mexico is a whole hell of a lot better than average on a number of these indicators. Very frequently, these subs are the second most important business contributor of these countries. Certainly in the case of BBVA, certainly in the case of Citibank, and in several other cases as well. Procter, Colgate, and so on. And if you ask, well, how do Mexican corporates do in the Mexican environment, and you take similar size entities, large guys, once again, they do very well. These are numbers that compare EBITDAs, or operating profits, to total assets, and just a simple division that shows, geez, they're above a number that I would consider a good return, which was 10%, steadily. 10% over total assets is a big number, big number. And when they're contributing something like 30%, or 17 as in the case of the two phone companies, you even have evidence that suggests that maybe we got a different kind of a problem. Which I think we have to be wary of. Yes. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Isn't this an indication of the problem that the cost of capital is too high and the barriers to entry are too high, so the profits are outsized and you get slower growth?
I certainly would buy it in the case of the two phone companies, but particularly of this one, of Telmex, because Telmex is the one that really used its muscle in order to make it almost impossible to compete head-on-head. América Móvil was born with a license that obligated it to face competition from the subs of corporations like Telefónica, for instance, from the get-go. So competition was stronger in that case. But These companies have distinguished themselves from being able to use regulatory tools in order to keep competition at bay. There are really high costs to a bad reputation. I am afraid that, here we'll look again for the blue performance number, that if you normalize Mexico's foreign investment, incoming foreign investment, by population, our numbers are flat. Everybody else's numbers have got a positive slope. This probably already reflects that dismay with Mexico's economic and social performance, and that problem to do with reputation and how we are perceived. In fact, Jaime Serrapuche, in a very light piece, I don't think he would consider this the most important analytical piece he's ever done, suggests that maybe this part of the Formación Bruta de Capital Fijo is already starting to show a relationship between crime rates, which went back up, you will recall, and the investment levels in the country. Lots of other things are going on in Mexico at the same time, and this is why Jaime doesn't want to say this is clear evidence that these two things are correlated and working against each other. But it is suggestive of a potential problem. And I think we have another case, the tourism sector of Mexico, where the perspectives on Mexico are starting to hit us. For the first time, this time series actually pointed down. This had been a time series that had grown monotonically since 1987 to 2009. Three horrible things happened to the Mexican tourism sector in the year 2009. One was the Great Crisis, or the Great Recession in the United States. The other one was the swine flu. And the third was this problem with perceptions about Mexico. And in fact, we had a very significant drop in the brand of Mexico in another branding system that's used in order to evaluate the quality of tourism sites. We dropped 11 places. And as a total drop was 15%. This is the first time that this series, which had grown monotonically, had a drop. We came back 6% in the following year, but 6% is lower than 15%, so consequently, we're still not where we were. And this is incoming tourism. Our reputation became so bad, in fact, that Schweppes used the swine flu in order to put together an ad campaign that said the best way to get a seat on the subway is to wear a big sombrero and carry a box of Kleenex, because then nobody will want to sit next to you, and here are all the passengers of the subway or the tube in London sitting back there. So when your reputation turns out to be a boon for somebody's advertising campaign, you know you've reached a special status in a loss of brand equity. I am more concerned, actually, with other effects. The loss of confidence in democracy is starting to tell. Latinbarometro suggests that Mexicans have lost their faith that democracy will take them where we want to go, and they're starting to talk about other types of more authoritarian regimes in order to regain control of things to do with security. There's also a loss of political support for serving administrations. Mitofsky right now shows that the PRI is almost hands down to win the upcoming election. There's been a politicization of the war on crime. And perhaps the most serious of all things is that talented individuals such as Carlos are now living in the United States instead of choosing to live in Mexico. He didn't come here for that reason, I don't think, but there are really very significant losses associated with this problem of perceptions. I think it's time to fix this. Yes.
Roberto, because I want to give sufficient time to Carlos, can we do the fix after he's made his presentation?
Encantado.
Can we do that? I know that Roberto could keep us engaged and fascinated for another 10 minutes, but I do want to give Carlos a chance to do his response, and having looked at his slides, I know that he has got more economic data. So, Carlos, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm taking off my jacket because
It's hot.
You're getting ready for battle, Carlos. You're getting ready for battle. Looks like.
No, not battle, really. No. Well, while Andrew is on that, I just want to thank Andrew and Roberto for inviting me to comment on this presentation. I am a fan of this institution. I come every time I'm invited when I am in town So, and I love talking about economics, which is what I used to do. Now I don't do it that much anymore. Is this okay? Yeah. But in any case, just a few words before I start commenting on several of the points in Roberto's presentation and a piece of paper that you sent to me, a paper that you sent, which I think is what is behind the presentation. But some of the things that I'm going to comment on are not explicit in the presentation, but they were in that paper. So, well, thank you very much for inviting. Just one general thing that I would like to say, which is a hurting thought for Mexico right now. Unfortunately, much of the world in economics moves on perceptions. And the perception, if, for example, if one wants to compare Mexico and Brazil, there is an important difference in the perception that people have about Brazil. It's true, you know, the data and criminality and so on, I have seen it already. But somehow, you know, people feel more secure in Rio de Janeiro and walking around than in Mexico City because of the news, because of whatever the perceptions. And another thing that I want to say before I forget, because I didn't write it down in my notes, is that like celebrities, you know, TV and cinema, unfortunately, what I have seen over the years, and these are several years of watching international and national developments in economics, is that the media is very subject to fashion. Now, Brazil is fashionable. Everything that happens in Brazil is fashionable. If it was not, people were probably would be criticizing the heavy load of regulation that happens in Brazil, the government intervention in everything that happens in Brazil, and so on and so forth. But it is fashionable nowadays. Fortunately, I think, by the way, that the new president is doing much better in those respects, and surprisingly for me, than the previous one. So I usually, you know, when I was in the government, I was very critical of what happened and of economic, maybe too much, of economic policy issues in Mexico. But being outside the government and being what happens in my country, I have become an optimist. We were in a meeting recently here in this institution, and the meeting, I think I was late, but it was divided between the optimists and the pessimists and so on. So I can declare myself an optimist on this. Therefore, my comments will not be, okay, thank you. My comments will not be, how do you do this? Okay. My comments will not be very controversial with respect to what Roberto has already said. First of all, well, one of the things, in that paper, Roberto says that, well, maybe economic policy makers could focus a little bit more in doing what they have to do instead of worrying about crime and the perceptions and so on. I think that's true, but I think that nothing prevents people doing economic policy in Mexico from doing what they have to. And I think there are several aspects of economic in Mexico that have been, let's say, not in the optimal level that is required in order to promote investment, to promote growth, to control public finances, and so on and so forth. So it's not only that there is a lot of crime, but I think that people have been a little bit distracted because of politics. I think the team in Mexico, the economic team, is very, very young, and very young, let's say. So that I think they could do much better than what they're doing in terms of economic policy, especially in microeconomics. So that's one comment. Another one, which is, this is more a question for later on for Roberto, because it's difficult for me to see at the same time that the country is no longer perceived as a key business prospect and the huge profits that you were talking about. By the way, I think the huge profits that someone was mentioning, I think there is a competition problem all over the place, not only with the telecommunications, but just go to Mexico, to one restaurant, and compare the number of brands of beer, because I like beer, so I noticed, that you find in a Mexican restaurant, and then go to a similar restaurant in Central America, or South America, or Europe, or the US. And the number is tremendous. We have two producers of beer in Mexico, and they divide the market. among themselves. And they are they still have an amparo, how you say that? An injunction against the competition ruling, and they have protected themselves to produce information, not even for the investigation. So it's been stuck like that for 8 years, I think, or 10 years. So we have a huge problem still, despite the recent progress in competition. Let me say a few things about NAFTA. The other thing, NAFTA, to me, has been wonderful for the country. And I think it's mentioned in your piece of paper also. But I think that NAFTA, and this is not wrong, is a merchandise agreement of free trade with the US and Canada, okay? Now, since NAFTA, what has happened in the world is that the source of growth for the major economies and for some developing economies has been the service sector. And NAFTA is not a service agreement. So we are still, I think we as two countries, we have a lot to do in the future for doing something else in this respect, which is much more difficult than goods, this thing of services. Let me show you some things about NAFTA. And you tell me, please, if I'm taking too long, because I get excited on these things. Again, on the optimist side, look at this graph. Someone sent it to me. The green bars is the share of Chinese exports in American imports. And the red one is the Mexican, and the blue is the Canadian. So obviously the Chinese are exporting a lot more to the US. But it's true that we are winning the race vis-a-vis the Canadians. And I think that's very important. Another one that I saw, is this one. This is the pre-NAFTA situation, you know, the share of trade or the share of total exports that went to the US. And this is right after NAFTA. This is a specialization of the Mexican exports in the American market. But now we are below pre-NAFTA levels in terms of share of total exports. So I think this is very good news also, right? Because the economy, you know, the NAFTA has proved to be a more trade, as they say in economics, trade creation rather than trade diversion, which was what we feared at the moment. Well, more comments on this. I've already said about Brazil. You know, I shouldn't speak badly about Brazil because it's part of my responsibilities in the bank. So, you know, and this is a very political institution, so I shouldn't speak badly about that. But it is a different model of economic policy that it's just not consistent to what used to be called the Washington Consensus. Right? It's a lot of intergovernment intervention. I mean, look at, for example, I saw this number, and then we recreated the number. The Brazilian household, the average household in Brazil, devotes more than a quarter of its disposable income to pay interest. I saw that in the Financial Times. And then we recreated the numbers in my office, well, The Economist. Right? It's 26% or something like that. Just before the American crisis of 2 years ago, the number was below 20 for the same number. So you know, and then you have real interest rates in Brazil that are of the order of 14%. So something's wrong there, right? The market is just not working as one would imagine. Let me say something totally different. This is another comment on Roberto's, the demographic bonus. Right? Well, yes, we have what is usually called the demographic bonus because of the age of our citizens and so on. But the thing is that the bonus exists because you have a bunch of people that come into the labor market and they start paying for Social Security, and the payments, you know, the amount of the payments is more than enough in order to sustain the system for a while. That's the demographic bonus. But the problem that we have in Mexico, and this is one of the concerns, is that we have a large portion of the population which is in informality, not paying taxes, not paying formal Social Security. And I think some of the government policies, not from this government, from the previous one where I worked, are helping that case. You know, we have this Seguro Popular nowadays that basically you can avoid paying any social security and you can receive some sort of health insurance, right, in Mexico. And this goes for the millions and millions. I think myself that is unpayable in the long term. Again, there is a problem with, yes, with productivity, and this is a comment that I want to make on you. But this is the problem of productivity and education. Yes, well, it's Mexican, but it's also the region. And let me show you something here. Sorry, I'm confusing myself on this. This comes from an IDB book, and it's for a strange reason. This is called the Brazilian cluster and Mexican cluster, but it doesn't matter. It shows you the trend of productivity. Now, there are several ways of calculating productivity. This is one. This is total factor productivity in Latin American countries, and it has been declining very sharply since the end of the 70s. And this is a challenge for understanding and for economic policy. We are also lagging behind quality of education, right, which is something that we all know. And when we compare to the East Asian tigers, it happens that they are more open to trade too. So the old recipe is not that wrong. You know, we have to work on trade, on education, and oh, thank you. And this is a little bit more of the same, because one would say, well, it's a whole continent, but no. Relative to the U.S., you know, LAC6, which are the 6 biggest economies in Latin America, their numbers relative to the U.S. have also been declining since the end of the 70s, which is very worrying, right? Because when one looks at the analysis here in the U.S., they are always worried about productivity, and they're saying, well, the American firms are lagging behind Japanese and East Asian firms and so on, but we're still behind. Look at this. This is a long period of time. This is nearly 30 years. But the thing is that while productivity, this is total factor productivity, has declined in Latin America, it increased very, very importantly in China and other countries. Frankly, I don't know what this is, but this is India. East Asia, right? But look at India. There was an article on productivity and services in The Economist the other day. Well, another concern that I have in public finances is the way that the Mexican government has been spending over the last few years. I think that was right. It was the right reaction because of several things, mainly the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, and also the willingness of the government to put forward some economic reforms. So in other words, the government, in my opinion, in my view, had to pay for them. But the thing is that we are on a different plateau of public spending. This is real figures, right? So this is not nominal. Actually, we are 26% above those previous years, right? And look, I mean, it's okay, we have the money, and so far we have had the money, right? Because we have a lot of oil. Still, you know, the Pemex has been very successful. People may not believe it, but has been very successful in stopping the decline of production of oil, right? Look at this. It stopped. You know, doing very many different things. And the price has been very beneficial lately for the Mexican oil. So my point is that we are on a path of high public spending sustained on revenue sources that will not be permanent. Something will have to be done at some point. It's not urgent, but I think it's urgent to think about that. In Roberto's paper, there is a very good and important conclusion, I think. It may be evident, but it's not in the eyes of many people, which is, and I'm citing, the balance of the last 20 years of development and growth is largely positive for Mexico. And I think that is true. And that is very much because of the policies that were taken that he already described, and NAFTA and other things that were done. Number 10, I don't want to talk about that, but I think that maybe, I don't know if FDI per person is the best measure. I don't know. Anyway, this is a little bit more technical. But the point that I would like to highlight is that the expectations have been improving for the Mexican economy. These are the projections, and I didn't put it here, but of the IMF, right? This for 3 years, 2010, this is a little, like a few months ago, 2011 and 2012. And if you look at the rates of growth that are anticipated for the Mexican economy, they're really behind, in this region, they are only behind Peru and Chile, and above Brazil. So, you know, there is a lot about the comparisons that sometimes they're not consistent completely with the available data. Yeah. This is IMF, the World Economic Outlook of the IMF, which is more the most official numbers, let's say. And also internally, you know, look at, this is a very interesting, I think, chart, because this is what people, this is a survey that is taken every month by the central bank, and this is a survey among analysts of the private sector. It's very good. It's a very representative figure. It's been there for a while, and well, look at 2010. You know, everyone was very pessimistic, and suddenly by the end, this has been picking up importantly, which is a good sign, right, for the Mexican economy. This is the expectations of Mexican analysts about Mexico. I'm going to finish with this slide. Just three thoughts. What Roberto says in his presentation and the paper, that yes, our political debate is destructive, basically. You used more elegant words, but it's, I think it's what it says. I think it's true. But why is it? Why does it happen? And I think that's a question which is very interesting. I think there is a problem of leadership. We have not had enough observations of the PAN government, because the first president was not really someone that came from the party, you know, like that. The second one, Mr. Calderon, he really comes from the ranks of the party, but we haven't seen exactly the sort of leadership that may arise from a party like the PAN. And in my view, the problem with the PRI is that except for one or two figures, you know, if you went to sleep 25 years ago and then opened the Reforma instead of Excelsior at the time, you know, today, and then you would see PRI and the people, and they are the same persons, not the same kind of persons. They are the same individuals that are in power. And so I think that's a little strange on the one hand, and to me it speaks of a lot of people trying to hang out to jobs and some political power and so on, and not so much to lead on important issues for the Mexican economy. So I already said it, that in my opinion, the media, international media, has been subject to fashion, I don't know, waves. Is that correct? But we were benefited by one of those in the 90s. I mean, people were very good and so on and so forth. But Mr. Salinas was a darling everywhere, right? And he was charming, and everyone thought it was. I mean, you went to if you follow soccer football, I remember the Azteca Stadium full, more than 100,000 people, to watch a match between the Mexican team and Barbados. Come on, I mean, that would never attract the attention of anyone. I mean, those guys are not even professionals, and everyone was cheering for Mexico. It was like that. It was a wave, and now I think we are on the other side of the wave, which is very concerning. I agree. And the brand manager, which is, in the paper you said, well, you know, if I was in charge, I would fire the brand manager. I don't know who that is.
That's what I want to move to later.
Yeah, but I will finish with this. Combination, in my view, something that happens in Mexico, there is a sort of complacence, a sort of comfort with mediocrity. You know, things are not that bad, right? Go to Mexico City, the restaurants are full. You know, I mean, people are like a little comfortable on that. And this term that I heard in this building, by, I think it was Luis de la Calle, that he says, we have to finish with Mexican exceptional. This is not a word in English, but anyway, it's So all those people that say, well, that doesn't work in Mexico, this is different, and no, that doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So I will finish with that, with my comments. Thank you.
We are very fortunate to have had two serious analyses. Thank you for the statistics, the thought, and the graphs, Roberto, that you yourself designed. I would ask if you could leave your PowerPoint presentations and that perhaps they could go up on the web, please, and be available to others. I'm going to suggest that we question this analytical part for about 10 minutes, and then we move to the recommendations that Roberto has to resolve this, which you can see has already provoked the criticism, maybe, or the support of Carlos Hurtado. So let's start with questions. Please, your name and your affiliation. And there is a microphone coming around. Thank you.
Everyone else is being shy. Let me.
Oh, yeah.
Let me challenge you on this, and it's not because I disagree with you, but I want to push you a little bit further on this, Roberto, and see how Carlos reacts on this as well. What about the argument? I mean, Felipe Calderon is fond of saying that that drug trafficking, organized crime was like a cancer. I mean, which means the country can, there can be lots of great things going on in the country, but you need to focus right now on the cancer. You need to pay attention to that, because if you don't do that, then later on things will get much worse. And so the first priority is, yes, I mean, it's bad for the image of the country to focus on a set of really bad things, but it's also necessary to do that to move forward and to get to the other side. And that some of the brand equity problems have to do with reality, right? I mean, the country's economy is growing well. It's a great country for utilities if you're a large private company, but on the other hand, if you're a citizen living in Ciudad Juarez, things are actually pretty bad. If you're in Tamaulipas or if you're in parts of western Michoacan, it's not the best of times.
I would never dispute that we have problems. I mean, I think we have two issues, and in fact, I would pretty much sign up for everything that Carlos said in his commentaries about the management of the Mexican economy and complacency and under-management of the microeconomics of Mexico. I think that the issues have to do with microeconomy much more than the macroeconomy. I certainly think we have a crime issue. I don't want to back away from it. I would argue that if you're going into a decisive battle against organized crime, you have got to communicate two things. One is we have to fight this war, and the second is we've got all of these other assets that we can play with and should continue to work with as we fight this war. I think we've underplayed Mexico's strengths and overplayed the issue of political, rather the issue of facing off against organized crime. Countries like the U.S. have had an organized crime problem, and I don't think that they gave up all of the other agendas that had to be faced when they were going into this battle, and I think that's a mistake we made. Other countries have succeeded at both fighting organized crime and projecting a different image. Colombia, I think, is a case in point. Particularly under President Uribe, which really the perception now is, wow, they changed the conditions of Colombia, and they did. They especially changed the perceptions about the conditions of Colombia, because Colombia still has got an organized crime problem that it's got to continue to deal with for many, many years. I think we're losing our confidence that we can win this battle precisely because we're not doing a good job of pointing out what assets that we have that can be brought to bear to grow modern Mexico.
Hi, Debbie Reiner from the American Chamber of Commerce of Mexico. Excellent presentations. One always learns a lot from listening to either of you. I just had a couple of comments. One, in terms of the statistics about incoming tourism, what you said, Roberto, was absolutely correct. Obviously, the Great Recession, the swine flu, et cetera, had negative impact on revenues in 2009, and we're seeing growth thereafter. But if you look at not the revenues, but rather at the number of tourists, and you break it down into, let's call it gran turismo, or people who are visiting the beaches, people who are visiting the interior of Mexico, and border tourists, what you see is that the numbers of border tourists, either Americans coming into Mexico or Mexicans going into the U.S., have dropped precipitously. That would argue to me, and the drop began long before the Great Recession, so that would suggest to me that we're seeing an impact on tourism from the security situation. Obviously, in the revenue figures, that's masked by the fact that people who go to beaches spend so much more than people who are just crossing the border. In terms of investment, just following up on your comment, what I see is that while the security situation definitely affects the cost structures of companies, foreign companies by and large are not canceling investment plans because of the security situation. For me, and I'd be interested if you all share this perception or not, the issue is much more about the effect of extortion, narco-violence, and the whole security issue on domestic investment. After all, multinationals have a very small percentage of their portfolio in Mexico. Mexican is much likely to be very heavily concentrated in Mexico. So I would be much more concerned about the effect of security on small and medium-sized companies, the pymes, than on the impact on multinationals. And finally, Carlos, taking advantage of your many years in trying to control expenditures, it seems to me that essentially the way that Mexico has carried out its decentralization model has been one in which resources, participaciones for state and local governments, has been a political currency that's been used in order to win support for reforms. To me, it seems that, and you've written extensively on this, Roberto, that the rate at which things are going, I mean, the next black hole of the public sector finances is basically going to be the expenditures by state and local governments. If we have complaints about transparency with respect to federal government expenditures, we don't even want to go near what state and local governments are doing. Thank you.
Roberto, you'd like to start, and then we'll pass on to Carlos.
Basically, I would agree with most of your commentaries about the impact on tourism. I do think that the border tourism started to drop off some time ago because the transaction cost crossing from Mexico to the United States rose dramatically after 2001, and this in itself was going to have an impact. Obviously, if you know when you're returning to the United States, you're going to have to pay that high transaction cost, you're going to be dissuaded from coming across the border. So security perceptions, because this was still much more a perceptual problem than a real problem, was the first item that hit tourism, and this happened at the border. And it happened as a response to what happened here in 2001, and I think it's a very natural expression of U.S. Concern about its citizens, and ni modo. I mean, that's just reality. It is true that this was exacerbated significantly by the goings-on in Ciudad Juárez and Reynosa and so on. And who the hell wants to go to those cities to begin with? but if you did,
Very good in Ciudad Juárez.
see, well, you want to go for the good food, see. But with the perception that this is a dangerous place to go, it becomes a lot worse. It's still, we don't have enough data points to be able to regress out which of the three factors that I pointed to that explain the drop of 15% explains the majority of it. The three are one-offs. The United States economy has never dropped the way it did, nor have we had swine flu, nor have we had a crime problem of the sort that we have right now. There's a lot of noise in these numbers, but I'm sure the three contributed significantly. And if you ask the question in surveys, which is an approach to it, you're starting to hear that there is a significant concern among foreign travelers about whether they're safe in Mexico. I work on the board of an international corporation that held its meeting in Mexico, at an enormous cost related to security. I mean, we traveled around literally in a bus with an ambulance following us everywhere, por si las flies. No, I think that they spent money, seriously wrong, because all of our visit was in Mexico City, and there was never a whisper of anything that would put us in danger. But the perceptions were certainly there, and it had a lot of people scared. And as Carlos said, I mean, this was his entering salvo. In economics, we know damn well that perceptions are every bit as important as reality. And as a consequence, my takeaway as an economist is you manage perceptions. You don't just ignore them. And this is something that Carlos Salinas and his guys understood brilliantly. Yes.
10 minutes to
Yes.
Carlos, response to David.
No, just a point on the public finances. It's true, but let me what you're saying is true. I think there is a problem of decentralization, but I would like to make 2 points. This problem of decentralization and the possibility of a crisis is not, in my view, similar to what we saw happened in Brazil a few years ago, or what happens in Spain today, right? In which you have the subnational entities subject to excessive debt and so on, because basically they cannot go into debt, the states in Mexico. Now the problem is that there is a fight for the resources between the federal government and the states and the municipalities. And that's a very boring stuff for budget. But I think the interesting point is that to me, that's one of the important transition aspects of the transition between subnormal democracy that we used to have and normal democracy that we have now. Because before, everyone responded to the same person. So, I mean, and everyone was disciplined and so on and so forth. So we had no rules. Okay, the rules were the president's rules. When that ends, then we have the problem. So we never know who's responsible for anything. You have a house in Valle de Bravo. Well, just imagine who's responsible for the water of the lake. And everyone jumps, everyone wants the money, but no one is responsible because it's not written anywhere. So that happens yes, there is a huge problem. Education and health, very expensive.
I'm going to take 2 questions together because I then want to move on to the remedy. Please.
I'm Edith Wilson, and I want to take us back on your nice slides, Roberto. When you show the sort of peak of media focus on serious subjects about Mexico, it wasn't an accident. Mexico was, at that point, it had a goal which unified the country. It had decided to go for NAFTA. It had an intense international campaign focused on the United States. I think I can still recite Jaime Serra's Scale and Scope speech, relentlessly delivered in North America. We could probably have a competition. There are other people here who I'm sure know it well. Mexico also had a organized domestic campaign to explain what it was trying to achieve. And it spent a great deal of time, talent, and money, both of its senior people in terms of how they spent their time, and of having people, of whom I was glad to be one, who were trying to obtain those results. I mean, media fashions don't come by accident. So the question becomes, if Mexico faces an incredibly tough situation right now, how, and I think you're going to get into this, how is Mexico going to organize itself to be able to say what it needs to say? And I agree with you, there's some more stories. But the other thing that I think we have to look at, with the help of some other people here, is how the places where those stories can resonate have changed. I mean, the structure of the media industry has changed. The number of people who cover Mexico has changed. The places where you can get people to read stories has changed badly in many cases. And yet, of course, with social media, we have some new opportunities. So I guess what I just would, much as I
You would
love the
caution-
many economists I worked with during that period, and in terms of my work at the World Bank, I would caution that when you characterize what stories come out in the media, there is analysis behind that that is very hard work.
Edith, thank you very much, and we're going to get onto that next. We've got one more question here at the back.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Leslie Griffin with New York Life. I just wanted to ask, it seems like Mexico has made a real effort to step up its international leadership on a number of issues, and I'm thinking of global climate change and work at the UN Security Council, and we've got Agustin Carstens running hard for IMF chief, and I just was curious whether and how you think these types of international leadership visibility efforts affect brand Mexico.
Two questions, both related, and take us to our final part.
Muy bien. Let me take the second question and then come back to yours, because yours is actually is a wonderful segue to the rest of the document. I would love to see the chief of the IMF be a Mexican. To begin with, because I like El Gordo and know him personally, and he's a terrific guy. Second of all, because it would be very, very good for Mexico's reputation. I mean, this undoubtedly is a statement of, Mexico can be world class. Here is a leader who's a good example of that world class. In fact, if you look around Washington, you find what we in Mexico talk about as the Renata, la Reserva Nacional de Talento. The group of people up here who are pursuing several different roles in Washington are remarkable. I mean, this guy right here is a remarkable economist. Santiago Levy is a remarkable economist. Blanca Heredia is a remarkable lawyer. I mean, there are people up here. Roberta, who's de vacaciones, sort of, is up here. There are all kinds of really amazingly talented Mexicans available, and a lot of them end up in Washington, and that always is reputation enhancing. But I think we need to do something a whole hell of a lot more purposeful, and that's the segue to your commentary. Let me take Carlos's thoughtful commentaries. Thank you, by the way. I hate it when people do good work, because it makes me look like maybe I didn't do that good work. Sí. ¿Dónde está lo mío? Aquí está. No, esto es.
That's fine.
I really like it.
One at the top. Very top. Yeah, the very top.
Perdón, gracias. So, I think we're at the very end. Good. Well, let me just go straight into it. I think we have two problems, and this was the issue that I certainly want to focus on. I think if we did nothing but try to regain our reputation and ignored real things, our construction of that reputation would be on very shaky grounds, and it would very soon show. In fact, I've spent the last 7 years of my professional life trying to shake Mexico up to do real things, and probably contributed to Mexico's bad reputation in so doing. because I spent a lot of time saying, we're doing this wrong, let's fix it, to the point where now I hear things that I said being told me, Roberto, tienes que poner a trabajar a los mexicanos in this stuff, and that's exactly stuff that I've been preaching to the choir for some time. So paradoxes come back and haunted me. But in addition to doing real things, such as reforms, I think we've got to focus a good deal more on execution. Carlos already suggested that we have a very young economic cabinet. Let me call that green and immature. Not as talented in their youth as the group that Carlos Salinas led, nor as disciplined in their youth as that group was. And so you can be young and brilliant in execution and young and less brilliant. I am not terrifically excited with the excellence that I see right now. We need real resources. Let me give you a real resources example. If you drive up Pennsylvania Avenue in the direction of Union Station, you drive by the Canadian Embassy. Canadian Embassy is a huge building. It's not, I don't think it's a beautiful building, but it makes a statement. I am here, I am Canada, I am big, and I'm right up against the U.S. Congress. There's a statement being made there that communicates a mission, a view of things that distinguishes them from the hoi polloi. If you go up Mass, you find the Australian Embassy with a similar statement. If you drive around Pennsylvania looking for the Mexican Embassy, you can drive right by it and miss it. It's a discreet building on 1700 in Pennsylvania. When you go inside, it's decente, pero muy republicano. It makes a statement of modesty that I frankly don't think goes with the relationship that we should be portraying with the United States. In fact, our three principal buildings are all sort of discrete buildings. The embassy's residence is not great. The consular office is okay. I would have us just put together an office that made a grand gesture and established a big message for everybody to hear. This is a resource commitment. Now, these are peanuts side of the resources we spend on other things. So it strikes me perhaps we're, what is it, pound foolish and penny wise with some of these issues. We also don't have continuity. We were going to lead the world under Jorge Castañeda, and we're going to be very proactive in our foreign policies. And then Luis Ernesto, my buddy, by the way, para que no haya duda, it came, and he immediately started backpedal. And Patricia, ni se diga, no, we're not backpedaling, we're going uphill again. It's strange. And I don't think the president has given this topic any of his time or attention until very recently. Real things that had to be done were not done, and they were not done in a timely fashion. Moreover, there is no,
We have reached 2 o'clock, so for those who are waiting to catch trains,
Go ahead, leave.
understand if you've got to leave. But for those who are as captivated as I am and who want to have another 10 minutes, hang in.
Okay, good. We also need an influence strategy, and the influence strategy has got to be shaped purposefully with a clear mission, with a very clear and targeted set of messages. When I say targeted, I'm actually picking up exactly on what you're talking about. There are many audiences that we've got to influence, not one or two. Those many audiences are geographically dispersed. They're not the same ones that used to be important in the 90s. And if we want to influence them, we've got to be there, and we've got to be there with a message. And this requires a dedicated staff, and that dedicated staff has got to be world-class at a lot of things. Good economists, good communicators, good influencers, people that you want to be with. I mean, Luis de la Calle is sort of a startlingly good example of what the hell I'm talking about, because he really is remarkable. But there are any number of them that I can think of who would be wonderful. In fact, take any of the several young men or women who are already up here. I'm thinking of Antonio Ortiz Mena or Karen Antevi, and give them money, give them a mission, and tell them to go conquer the world, and they can do things, and they would do things. So I don't think we're doing this game particularly well. And then we need metrics, and we need follow-up. And all of this suggests we've got to be really purposeful. I've lost it. We have experiences to draw on. We don't have to pretend that this game has never been played by anybody in the world, and we have to invent it all. People who really know how to lobby the United States effectively are people like the Israelis. Just think of what happened at Benjamin Netanyahu 3 days ago in the U.S. Congress. 30 times those congressmen stood up and applauded. I don't think it was because they are really that enthusiastic about in Netanyahu. It is because they knew that they were required to by the people who influenced them. The same thing's true for Canada. I've already made a statement. In Korea, Mexico played this game very well in 92, 93. There are countries that are playing the communications game exceptionally well. Brazil and China are doing it very well right now. And the question of soft power, this is what Joseph Nye has talked about so intelligently, suggests that we are not one of the shapers. Chile is a better shaper of discourse in Latin America than Mexico. And certainly Singapore, this little tiny island, managed to have more impact on perceptions and influence the world than anything that we have right now with a population that's probably 50 times larger. I'm going to try and find myself again. Maybe I won't.
Sounds like an existential challenge.
Let's see. The stakes are really huge. Let me do just a for instance. If we got 10% more FDI out of a purposeful behavior and communication and promotion in the United States, and turn that into a perpetuity without growth, so this has no rosy assumptions behind it, that in itself is worth, at present value, 2.5% of Mexico's GDP. It's an enormous number. It's so large that it would make any investment that we make look tiny by comparison. If we got just 10% more tourism to Mexico than we're getting right now, that itself is worth about $300 million, or 0.3% of GDP. The numbers, as a consequence, are not tiny numbers. But if we're really going to be concerned about what this is all about, it's about avoiding a huge opportunity cost. I'm really concerned that perceptions are starting to shape reality. But if we want to also change the discussion with the United States on things to do, for instance, with migration and the welfare of 12 or 13 million Mexicans who live in the United States, having a good reputation on which to base this discussion is indispensable. We're not going to be able to influence the gringos until such a time as they say, my neighbor to the south is pretty civilized, knows what they're after, and are asking for fairly reasonable things. I don't think we've got that under control right now. We are letting a very valuable, intangible asset called Mexico, the brand, go down the tubes. And this is an enormous cost for our nation and requires that we act with an imperative today. I shut up.
Roberto, thank
Si.
you. You leave us with a disturbing message. You also leave us whether the Mexican government can do it or whether once again you need to involve Madison Avenue in this effort. I'm always suspicious when Madison Avenue is put out there and the fundamentals behind are not so strong. So we have much to think about and hopefully meet again to talk further on this subject. Thank you all for coming.